Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you cried and then immediately felt embarrassed about it? When was the last time you felt a surge of grief or rage or fear and then told yourself to get it together, to be rational, to stop letting your emotions run the show? We've all been there because somewhere along the way, most of us absorbed this idea quietly, steadily, almost without noticing, that emotions are the enemy of good thinking, that to feel deeply is to think poorly, that the wise person, the strong person, the serious person keeps their feelings in check. Stoicism gets memes, logic over feelings gets t-shirts, and the person who cries in a meeting, who admits they're heartbroken, who gets angry about injustice, they're called too sensitive, irrational, weak. But what if that entire framework, the one that splits reason from emotion and ranks reason above it, is not just wrong, but philosophically indefensible? What if our emotions are not noise in the system, but data? Not obstacles to wisdom, but components of it. That's exactly what one of the most important philosophers alive today has spent her career arguing. Her name is Martha Nussbaum, and she wants to completely change the way you think about what you feel. Martha Nussbaum is a professor at the University of Chicago Law School and one of the most decorated philosophers in the world. She's written over 20 books, received the Kyoto Prize, which is basically the Nobel Prize for Philosophy and Art, and has been recognized as one of the most influential thinkers of the last 50 years. But what makes her remarkable isn't just her credentials. It's that she went deep into questions that most academic philosophers considered too messy, too soft, too emotional to take seriously. Questions like, what is grief, really? Is anger ever justified? Can shame destroy a person's humanity? What does compassion demand of us politically and personally? Her landmark work, Upheavals of Thought, The Intelligence of Emotions, published in 2001, is nearly 800 pages of rigorous philosophical argument built toward a single radical claim. Emotions are a form of evaluative judgment. They are not just feelings, they are cognitive assessments of what matters. Let that land for a moment. When you feel grief, Nussbaum argues you are not just experiencing a wave of sadness, you are recognizing that something of genuine value has been lost. When you feel fear, you are judging that something important to you is under threat. When you feel compassion, you are perceiving that another person's suffering is real and undeserved and significant. Emotions, in other words, are not reactions that happen to your thinking. They are part of your thinking. To understand why this is radical, you have to understand what she's pushing up against. For centuries, starting with the ancient Stoics, running through Kant, Descartes, and deep into modern culture, there has been a powerful tradition that treats emotions as fundamentally suspect. The Stoics, in particular, argued that emotions like grief, fear, and love were false judgments, beliefs that external things matter, when in truth, the only thing that matters is virtue and inner rational control. The ideal was apatheia, freedom from emotional disturbance. The Stoic sage feels no grief when a loved one dies because they've correctly reasoned that the loved one wasn't truly necessary for their flourishing. Now, I want to be fair here. Stoicism has a lot to offer. The idea of focusing on what you can control is genuinely useful. But Nussbaum zeroes in on what she believes is the fatal flaw at its core. The Stoics got the metaphysics wrong. Their argument that we should eliminate grief depends on the premise that nothing outside our own rational will is truly valuable. But Nussbaum says, of course a loved one matters. Of course your relationships, your community, your body, your possibilities in the world, these things have real value. And if they have real value, then grief when they're lost is not a mistake, it's accurate. Grief on this view is the correct response to genuine loss, not weakness, not irrationality, accuracy. She calls this the intelligent character of emotions, the idea that to have the right emotions in the right measure, at the right time, about the right objects, is itself a form of wisdom. And here's where it gets really interesting. Nussbaum argues that there are things we can only know through emotional experience, that certain moral truths are simply not accessible to purely abstract reasoning. She takes this idea in part from the novelist Henry James and builds a whole philosophy around it, that literature, and specifically the cultivation of emotional responsiveness in literature, is itself a form of moral education. Think about the last time a novel broke your heart, or a film made you furious on behalf of a character, or a piece of music opened up something in your chest you didn't know was there. Nussbaum would say, that wasn't just entertainment, that was your moral imagination being trained. You were learning to see the world through another person's eyes. You were practicing the skill of compassion. And compassion, in her framework, is not sentimentality. It has a specific cognitive structure. Genuine compassion, she argues, requires three beliefs: that another person's suffering is serious, they did not fully deserve it, and crucially, that their situation is one you yourself could face. This last element, what she calls eudaimonic judgment, connects their well-being to your sense of what a good human life requires. This is why compassion motivates action in ways that abstract moral reasoning often doesn't. You don't donate to causes or show up for people in crisis because you've run a utilitarian calculation. You do it because something in you responds, because their reality has landed in yours. Nussbaum also takes on shame and disgust, and here she becomes really politically urgent. She argues that disgust, in particular, is a deeply unreliable moral emotion. Historically, disgust has been weaponized to dehumanize. It's been used to justify discrimination against women, LGBTQ+ people, people of color, the poor. The feeling of disgust is not a signal of genuine moral wrongdoing, it's often just a signal of difference. So Nussbaum doesn't say all emotions are trustworthy. She says emotions can be educated, refined, critiqued, just like beliefs. Some emotional responses are wise and well-calibrated. Others are distorted by bias, fear, and prejudice. The work is in learning to tell the difference. In her 2013 book, Political Emotions, Nussbaum takes this argument into the public square, and it becomes even more provocative. She argues that liberal democracies cannot survive on reason and principle alone. Justice requires love. Not romantic love, but something closer to what she calls civic compassion, a cultivated emotional orientation toward the equal worth and dignity of all citizens. Look around. We know what a society that runs on pure self-interest looks like. We know what happens when compassion atrophies, when disgust and contempt fill the space that civic love is supposed to occupy. We've seen it. Nussbaum's challenge is not just philosophical, it's urgent. She's saying that the emotional climate of a society is political infrastructure, that leaders, educators, artists, parents, all of us have a responsibility to cultivate the emotions that democracy needs to survive. And that begins, she insists, by not treating emotions as embarrassing, irrational noise. So what does this all mean practically for how you live? First, stop apologizing for your feelings. Not because feelings are always right, they're not, but because your emotional responses are data about what you value, what you fear, what you think matters. Dismissing them wholesale means cutting yourself off from crucial information about your own moral life. Second, get curious about your emotions instead of suppressing them. When you feel grief, ask, what have I lost that I believe was genuinely valuable? When you feel anger, ask, what do I believe has been wronged? When you feel compassion, ask, what does this person's suffering reveal about what a good human life requires? These are not soft questions, they are philosophical questions, and they're the questions that Nussbaum believes are at the heart of what it means to live well. Third, invest in your emotional education. Read novels, watch great films, engage with art that forces you to inhabit lives different from your own. Nussbaum is serious when she says this is not optional, that a life without this kind of imaginative exercise is a life with a stunted moral imagination, no matter how brilliant you are technically or analytically. And finally, reject the culture that tells you feeling deeply is weakness. The people who've changed the world, the moral visionaries, the reformers, the healers, have not been people who successfully eliminated their emotions. They have been people who felt precisely, who grieved what deserved grief, who loved what deserved love, who were rightly outraged by what was outrageous. Nussbaum is asking us to reclaim emotion, not as indulgence, but as intelligence. If this video got something moving in you, if it made you think differently about your inner life or made you want to pick up Nussbaum's work, then it did exactly what she'd want it to do. Share it with someone who's been told they're too emotional. Comment below with the emotion you've been dismissing that might actually be telling you something true. Subscribe if you want more philosophy that actually changes how you